3:30 away in there.
We're online. We're online. We're being televised to the globe. Hello for those of you who are watching. Congratulations, Joe Biden, I think.
Yes.
One more challenge remaining. Best of health to Rudy. Thank you, CEO. I think Deputy Mayor must be close. Yes, brilliant.
So what's going to happen?
Just wait for 7 o'clock to tick over because I did say that's when we'd resume. Yeah. We would. I'll just foreshadow that the motion and notice put by Councillor Groot, he may seek leave of the meeting to pull that forward when we start up again. So I'll now commence meeting again. We're at item 10.4. We'd finished, just about to move to item 10.5. Oh, Councillor Groot.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd seek leave to bring forward 14.1.
Need approval of 2/3 of the meeting. All those in favour? Against? It is thus brought forward. Yeah, it's your lucky night. Item 14.1, Councillor Groot, yellow line marking, page 335 of the agenda.
Thank you. I don't believe I need to read it.
Not at law, no.
So I won't. Look, this has come about as per our conversations in previous council meetings and also workshops. It really should form part of the conversation about the broader traffic management plan, but have pulled it out separately just to make sure we can get this going. It's asking for a conversation at a workshop and then some recommendations coming back to council so we can make some informed decisions around how we might move forward to it. I think there is some ambiguity at the moment around whether you can have them, can't have them, what triggers a yellow line, what doesn't trigger a yellow line. And this is certainly not suggesting we should have them all over the city because I don't think that is the answer at all. But I think where we need them, we should have them, and where they are, we should reinstate them. If we are resurfacing roads or things such as that. So it's a fairly simple motion, getting on the workshop agenda. Let's have a conversation about it and make a decision later on when it comes back to council.
Thank you. So moved. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Pearce, wish to speak to it?
I do, yeah. I think it's an excellent motion. I think we all receive a lot of feedback about this matter, and I think it's great to get on the table.
Thank you. Any further debate? Councillor De Backer.
Yes, just briefly, thank you, Councillor Groot, for bringing this to our attention. I'm really interested in the financial implications, but there's also, I suppose, two sides to that. One is the actual cost of doing it and maintaining it, but also the cost of not having it in the time of staff and that kind of thing. And I certainly agree with Councillor Groot in the fact that it might not be something that we do across the whole city, but if we strengthen up our policies, there might be sort of designated areas that we could do as a trial, just saying. And just further to that, I think what was really interesting, this came out that it was a practice of the department as opposed to a policy direction of council. So I think it's really important that we really look at our service levels, because this is, for me, this is a service level thing and an expectation in some spaces of what it should be. And I think we've got to be really careful, because if you yellow line mark in one place and there's faded ones in another, how you actually expiate in that sort of situation. So I'm really looking forward to the financial implications, not just the cost of doing it, but also the staff time.
Thank you. Further debate? Councillor Barnett.
I think Councillor. Oh, all right.
Sorry, Councillor Rip.
Pardon me. Yes, I think it'd be a very useful and interesting workshop to have. Being told that it will cost a lot of money if we want to do it across our city. And I'm just wondering, as part of the workshop or whoever organises it, could look at some implications because this is a metropolitan council issue across, our wider metropolitan councils and possibly some other ones as well. And whether it's not something that, how do we get a cost saving on this? Why do we just do it as our council? And why don't we perhaps look at it as a local government issue and see if there are, we share other things with other councils. So I'd be interested in following up the cost implications and how we can reduce those.
Thank you. Further debate, Councillor Rippon.
Yeah, I'm fully supportive of this motion, and I think I know in the past sort of councils, and not just City of Prospect, but some councils will turn around and say, oh, we don't need to do that because the Australian standards doesn't mean we need to do that. But at the end of the day, what we're saying to our community is, oh, if it's not a standard, then we just don't do it. And to me, I think we can actually be the leader in this space potentially, and really try and drive it, because if all councils just sit to whatever the basic standard is, and we're not really extending ourselves and not really improving. So, and particularly for me, I'm interested to look at the yellow lines, particularly within the 10 metres of the intersection. I think we could have some serious improvements across our city. I think if you go into particularly City of Charles Sturt, some of their line marking I think's been what's a lot better from what I've sort of seen, and I think we can really improve in this space. I would actually like to see us look at costing for doing this right across the city, get the figures, get the information, and if we were to look at doing this in the long term across the city, you could always break it down into, okay, well, this is what it costs, let's have a program to run it over 10 years. But we're sort of shooting from the hip because we don't have all of the costing and information. We could then look at, okay, well, it's going to cost too much, but we know where the hotspots are, so let's do the hotspots. But we can't really make these decisions on policy until we've actually done the work. So I think this is a good motion. It starts off as a conversation, then leads to a report, then comes back with findings, and then we can make the recommendations. But we can't really make recommendations until we actually have the costings and the information. But I commend Councillor Group for the motion. I think it's excellent, and I really do believe that City Prospect can improve on the yellow marking right across the city.
Thank you. Further debate? Just from my perspective, in terms of communities, the king of line marking it's got to be London, where they have all kinds of different lines and zigzags for all sorts of things. And you can go overboard, I guess is the point I'm making. Two examples there. On their corners, they have double yellow lines. Yellow line means don't park here. So what does a double yellow line mean to my family who are living there? I said, oh, that means really don't park here. So it's a really good example of a failure of public policy and implementation of line marking. But why wouldn't one work? Well, two kind of implies you're at risk of being towed away, as in not only shouldn't you park here, but we will move you. I think, oh, really? The other one was in a suburb called Southall, which had narrow streets and lots of townhouses. People would pull down their front walls to park two cars in their front gardens, but often they couldn't fit an extra car in for some reason. There was a dashed line down the middle of the footpath. Said, what's that line for? And that's where you can park two wheels up on the footpath, but not beyond that dashed line. So I'm always really interested in these discussions around what you should mark and not mark. And I think, for me, I wouldn't be in favour of marking across driveway crossovers, because that should be an absolute no-brainer. Some people get upset that the old 6-foot setback rule from the edge of the driveway crossover is no longer in place. People can park right up to your crossover. I understand that. But the other thing that frustrates me more than this is that we don't mark parking bays on streets, and people choose to park one car across the front of their whole house to stop someone else parking out in front of their house. So I'd be more interested in saying, if we want to get more capacity in our streets, we put little white lines to mark separation between bays. We could do it out here on Prospect Road to trial it. But I think things that facilitate rather than say no would be more useful, would be my approach. It all costs a stinkload of money. And that's the problem with this stuff. You'd have to say to people, you can have this, but your rates will go up, and they'll stay up because we've got to maintain it and we've got to enforce it, which means our patrols have got to go up and down every street. So I'll look forward to seeing the report come back, but it does make me think of London every time I see something about yellow lines. Notwithstanding, we haven't made a policy decision on this and changes have been made without our permission, and that needs to be closed up. We either need to say yes or say no, but the decision's got to be ours because we have to defend it one way or other. So I'm happy to support the motion if it comes to that. I don't think it does. There being odd numbers on the floor. Any further debate? Councillor Groot, do you wish to sum up?
Look, just to say, some really good debate, thank you. And certainly my intention to bring this forward is to do exactly what's been talked about, have a conversation about it, understand what our service standard is and what our resource implications are to do it, but also be very clear about what it is we are doing. And my intention has always been around how do we deal with problem areas, not how do we apply blanket law across every single street, because I'd hate to be in a prospect where every single driveway is marked and every single or double lines. That's certainly not my intention. But where we need to do it, we should be able to do it, and we should understand the rules for doing it. And for me, that's much more of an interesting part of the conversation. So I look forward to coming to a workshop. I look forward to particularly the resource implications, which is part of the motion to come forward to us really clearly, and then at some point debating it on the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the debate. All those in favour? Against is carried unanimously. Thank you. Councillor Groot indicated he may need to leave early, so that's why he asked to pull that item forward. So as you need to move on, Council, we'll leave that in your hands. We're back at item 10.5, the second consultation period, the draft planning and design code. I understand there's been some questions around how this works. There's a lengthy report. I believe we would benefit from suspending meeting procedures. And I've encouraged staff, should you agree to that, to do a brief presentation on how the online code works. So I just seek your permission to suspend meeting procedures until 7:30, should we need it. All those in favour? Against, thus suspended. Thank you. I'll just call forward staff. Yes, Scott. Please. Mr. Scott McCluskey has been designated the expert, which at this stage is not hard because I have no idea how to use it. You expert with not much competition, but Nathan might claim it. Very handy Christmas gift, right?
Yes.
Bit of a shoehorn.
Look what you missed out on, Matt.
So we'll just, whilst Scott's getting that going, the recommendation has a number of observations and comments about what we're going to write back. Has anybody got any questions about those, or we're just getting this up and running? Alison?
Yeah, I've just had a question about contributory items and representative buildings. My understanding, whether it was right or wrong, that there was limited, if not no, protections for contributory items prior to the change. Will representative buildings have any, so for example, if you had a certifier, for example, that was wanting to approve the demolition of a building that had contributory items and approve something new to go in its place, is that a pathway that people could use, or would it have to go through council?
I'll try to take a few parts to that. So with the contributory items being in historic conservation zones, those deemed to satisfy or accepted development pathways weren't there before the change. Notionally, the policy before the change indicated that under a performance assessment, you'll look at the character of the street and the character statement, determine that that house does or doesn't meet that character statement, and on that basis, demolition control would or would not exist. The submission put forward by a range of people was that that wasn't a particularly transparent way to run policy. We had identified contributory items that already met the character statements. That was the purpose of listing them. So by pulling them in as representative buildings, effectively they take the place of that policy. So instead of making an ad hoc assessment about each dwelling, there's a list of those representative buildings that would then have those demolition controls applied to them. Still very much no accepted or deemed to satisfy pathway that would apply there.
Okay, thank you. Are you ready to go?
Sure am.
Fire away.
So what I have started with, because I think it's the easiest way to start, is the actual code itself, and then I'll move to SAPA, which is the mapping system. I'll run through one case study in our current residential zone, one in the urban corridor zone. Please stop me at any point and ask questions. 3 ways to query the code. One is by an address, looking for all different types of development you could do on that property. One by keying in an address and a type of development, which serves to limit the number of responses you get, and you might move from having a couple of 100 pages of policy returns you want to search to having more like 60 or 70 pages of policy returns you want to search. I wouldn't call it a brief summary, but I would call it an improvement. Browsing the code itself, which is this third option, you see all 7,000 pages of the code. You can search through each section of the code. At a practitioner level, we will need to do that to assign policies to assessment tables to ensure they call up properly through the first 2 search techniques. I wouldn't recommend that any of us use that third method. I'll start by showing the first, which is just an address. So this has search functionality associated with it. So as you start typing, it will start to return responses. Once you select a property, it will then return some basic information about that property on the right-hand side of the screen, as well as a link.
It's no one's house in particular, is it? Just chosen at
relative random.
Relative random, okay, just to reassure you.
No, it is. I have chosen case studies to highlight particular points raised in our submission, but not beyond that. So, as we say, right-hand side highlights key local variations, which is principally site areas, building heights, those types of things. It also highlights all of the overlays that potentially apply to that property. So they're the layers that add detail or nuance to the policies that apply to that property. Below that, there are a series of expandable sections of policy. So I don't think they're terribly well titled, but the premise of this first one is you can see what kinds of things could be accepted development, assuming that they achieve relevant criteria, what kinds of things could be deemed to satisfy development, assuming they achieve the criteria, and so forth. So it's not there to tell you what does or doesn't meet it, but what could possibly be in one of those pathways. The second section below that speaks to the zones, overlays, and general policies that apply more particularly. So this makes the rest of the code invisible and just calls up the policies that could relate to this property. You can then expand through to look at this table below at the desired outcomes, the performance outcomes, and the deemed to satisfy or designated performance features that relate to the performance outcomes on the left-hand side of that table. So the premise of that table is the desired outcome broadly replaces the objectives or desired character statements associated with our current zones. The performance outcome explains the purpose or the overall intent of what the policy intends to achieve. Deemed to satisfy criteria or designated performance feature indicates one way of demonstrating that you have achieved the performance outcome.
So I'm in Clifford Street, own a house, want to knock it down because I don't like it. How do I know what I can put back by reading this? Run me through a scenario.
Sure. So somebody could call up the code in exactly the way we have now and say this first policy in front of me indicates the kinds of developments that are anticipated in this established neighbourhood zone. It's currently a residential zone. So that includes a new dwelling. It also includes offices, shops and consulting rooms, which is not something that is envisaged in our current residential zone. This is highlighted in our submission. It's on the screen in front of me, so it's convenient to mention now that our current development plan allows for small, up to 50 square metre non-residential uses ancillary to a home on a property. So it may be a 1 or 2 room type of home business.
It's got to be predominantly a house.
Predominantly a house.
Might have something, little hairdresser or an accountant or something like that.
Indeed. In terms of this new policy framework, it allows for a number of larger or circumstances where larger or indeed entire non-residential uses could exist in the established neighbourhood zone. So Clifford Street, and I'll just scroll up briefly, is on the western side of North Park Shopping Centre, which is this series of parcels here, with Clifford Street being adjoining an activity centre. I'll highlight those words briefly there. It does mean that this designated performance feature allows up to 200 square metres of retail, consulting or office activity on that property, and that is not required to be ancillary to a dwelling. So I could demolish my dwelling on the eastern side of Clifford Street and replace it with a 200 square metre shop. On the western side of Clifford Street, I could add a 50 square metre shop to my house.
How then does that fit in with what we're trying to get, the character of a street? If one side you've got all, commercialised, and they're not keeping the house. They're building on the front of it with a concrete bunker or something. So how can we avoid that?
To answer the first question, I think it doesn't pay a great deal of respect to the underlying principle of looking at streetscapes as a whole, and that was a strong part of the submission we've made informally to them in advance of this, and appears in our submission that's before you tonight. We've referred to it as a non-strategic and irrational approach.
It's zone creep, isn't it, really? This thing is, so they could buy up all the houses there and turn it into a little shop or a service strip.
I think that's exactly what it is, and I think the outcome in the left-hand column that indicates that the established neighbourhood zone supports the expansion of activity centres is exactly zone creep, and we're not supportive of it.
And that is what I understand a lot of owners of these shopping centres do. They buy up all around the area, just waiting for a right time to expand.
The rationale that's been put to us is the other side of that. So the state is indicating that shopping centre owners are hoarding land and stopping competition from entering the market, and they see this as freeing up opportunities for other people to purchase land to use for retail purposes. I tend to agree. I don't think that's what's likely to happen on the ground. I think it's likely to be zone and centre creep. Only another reason why I'm not supportive of that policy outcome.
It's a good test for us to think about, because at the moment you go down Clifford Street, you see houses both sides, and the zone boundary is on the back fence. So the people that live there have a big car park over their back fence, and they have a big shopping centre. So the street looks good, but for them, they may or may not like that. We've had complaints over time about people jumping the fence or the lighting from the car park or the noise from it. Or do you say the zone boundary should be the centre of the street? So one side is houses and their front yards look at the car park or the shopping centre, which is what happens on 3rd Avenue, where the zone boundary is in the street, not the back fences. And that's a good question for us to ask, but we haven't been asked. They're just telling us to suck us up, right?
Indeed. And the zone itself, in terms of the activity centre zone, refers to the establishment of landscape buffers and so forth at the western edge of North Park if they were to develop, for example. And that provides some ability to create some separation between the rear fence and that potential development in terms of interface on the local landscaping. There isn't that same opportunity when the zone is in the middle of the street, as it were. But you're right to say that this is not being asked, it's being told to us and asked if we have a view on it.
So you've expressed a view that we don't like it, and that's in the report, in the recommendation. Okay, all right.
Sorry. And so if this does become law, which I hope it doesn't, so we can't appeal against it anywhere.
Can't refuse it.
Or refuse it.
Yeah, so the issue would be that the Act obliges us to give regard to the designated performance feature, the right-hand column, while doing a performance assessment of the outcome in the left-hand column. It may well be that a particular application to us has a range of other impacts that offend other provisions, but in terms of, at its core, could somebody demolish a house and replace it with a shop that meets this criteria? Yes.
Or a Midas Mufflers or a hydroponic shop. Okay, next example.
Well, I might just quickly follow this link to move us over to SAPO and give a brief walkthrough of this tool as well, and then move to the next example, unless you'd rather that I touch on the next case study, David.
Show us this bit first.
Yeah.
Right. This is quite useful
Yeah.
because it's visual, certainly for our residents to be able to see.
So I wanted to enter this software this way so that you could see the linkage between the code and the SAPA.
Yep.
So this essentially has taken us to that property. It has pre-selected it and will allow us to do some things. But if you were to enter the SAPA, the Planning and Property Planning Atlas, fresh, you would see something that looks like this. It has a series of data layers on its left-hand side. You can change whether it is an aerial image or whether it's a street map that you see when you're looking at the map here. You can ask it to show you layers across the city, or this will take a little while to load, sorry, or you can ask it to give you information about a particular property. So in terms of looking at maps of the city, they work in this way. If I wanted to see, I'm not sure if this is exactly the same one, but that information about a property on the eastern side of Clifford Street, I can right-click to select it. And I note that's not particularly intuitive and has tricked a few people. So I'll say it again, that we right-click to select on this software. And that will then bring up a series of information fields on the left-hand side particular to this property. So rather than having a zone layer that sits over the city and trying to figure out based on colours what zone it is, this is telling us that it's in the established neighbourhood zone. It will give us a maximum building height of 2 levels and so forth.
Could I just point out, if we note where the car park is, there's small stunted trees.
At the time of this photo and since.
Yes.
Wow.
Some aren't replaced.
Okay.
Now, noting 7:30, if there's no questions on this, I'll return us to another.
Yep. Show us another one. Thanks,
Perfect.
Scott. Again, no one's house in particular, just to demonstrate the principles.
No, only because I do need an address to be able to query this. So
Close to Alan.
Not where Alan lives.
again, there is a purpose for wanting to highlight this property too, and it's along similar lines as before. So if I turn to the types of non-residential uses that could occur in this part of the city, and it's by no means the only part. So we spoke to one example of where shops could replace a dwelling up to 200 square metres in area. There is another, so for properties located more than 500 metres from an activity centre, there are criteria up to 100 square metres or 200 square metres. Now, I highlight Balfour Street, and I don't know what the likelihood that this would occur is, but each property on the northern and southern side of Balfour Street, each of the residential properties at least, is more than 500 metres from an activity centre. That would mean that each dwelling on Balfour Street could be demolished and replaced with a shop of up to 100 square metres in size.
Does it have to be ancillary? Just go back to the wording on that.
It does not.
So these things aren't A and B and C.
No.
Or any combination thereof.
That's just for the definition. So you can have a shop that has a consulting room within it and a little office within it, up to 100 square metres. That's ancillary. Or C says it just have to be 500 metres away and it can be 100 square metres.
Indeed.
So again, your whole street changes and its activity changes.
Yes.
Local members
See more
are
yellow
actually aware
marking
of
lines
this
being
detail.
done.
It would be good to highlight this detail.
I also think it'd be good to highlight it to the community as
Yes.
well. And I think that's where our communications come into it as well.
So we met with representatives from Residents Association, Busy and a couple of others recently to discuss our concerns in this area particularly.
Yeah, this is one I've been worried about. It actually has a history. This goes right back to the original, what they called, the reference group that looked at this. They had about 6 eminent people on it, and they said there should be much more freedom to have businesses anywhere, provided that it's performance assessed. So they should be able to fit in any house, any street, anywhere. And there was reaction against that straight away. It's interesting that it's flowed right through here to the very last iteration.
But
It's outrageous.
So, I mean, I went to Councillor Tobacco and Rosemary went to many of these, and this kept on amongst a lot of other points being made, but they haven't changed any response to this particular one and some others in response to the consultation.
They've changed a number of things.
Yes, but not this, and there are some others that are coming up for this.
Yep. Cognizant of time, 7:28. Did anybody else have any? Sorry, did you have any other examples you wanted to show us?
Urban corridor briefly.
Urban corridor looks like it's been watered down, so it'll be good to look at that. How many people got questions about the report?
I've got about some examples that came from the Residents Association.
Okay, so maybe I'll seek leave to extend suspension of meeting procedures until another 20 minutes. 7:50 should be needed. All those in favour? Against was carried. That's extended. How happy with Balfour Street? We understand the issue that Scott was pointing out. Happy to move to the next one. Thank you, sir.
Then semi-randomly selected property. This time I'm using the second query function to reduce the number of results we're having returned. So it's now indicating an additional query screen asking me what kind of development we undertake on that property. For the purposes of what I'm showing you here, I'll navigate through to how you would indicate you're looking to construct an apartment or townhouse building. But suffice to say that not all of these are particularly intuitive, and I expect we'll get a significant number of queries about how to use this tool. As an example, if I select commercial, industrial, rural, I don't see shop anywhere on this list. But if I click on commercial, all of a sudden retail and shop starts to appear. And I think by burying common terms under jargon, it has made this quite difficult to interact with. Setting that aside briefly, to return to the question at hand, select that we are doing a residential flat building, which could be townhouses or apartments. I'll undertake a search on that.
Townhouses fall under the definition of a flat?
So if the townhouses are part of one building, each with their own access to a public road, they would be road dwellings. If they are accessed via a common driveway within the property, then it is a residential flat building.
How depressing for the purchaser. Anyway.
So in this particular example, because there are no other pathways that could apply to a residential flat building, it's not giving us any response for accepted, deemed to satisfy and so forth. But if that were possible, then it would show multiple black lines here and allow me to expand on each of those under each pathway. So I mentioned in the first screen, it showed, was it possible for you to be deemed to satisfy? This is how you would understand whether you actually meet the criteria of deemed to satisfy. There aren't any here, so it must be performance assessed.
So you just say, oh, there's nothing that'll get a rubber stamp. I have to go through a full process.
Indeed.
Okay. Yeah.
Indeed.
Which is okay. We're happy with that, aren't we?
Yes.
Yeah.
Agreed. Unlike the first screen where it allows you to select by zone module or overlay module, this just now dumps all of the policy relevant to the performance assessment pathway here. Which isn't terribly user-friendly, and I'm sorry, it does mean I'll have to do a bit of scrolling to get to the point here, which is to say that a great number of the policies of our development plan do appear in the Planning and Design Code. We have highlighted in the submission a concern that the way that the policy modules are structured means that policy doesn't apply to buildings that it should, and in particular to three-storey townhouse buildings, which make up a reasonable proportion of the applications being lodged with us. I should say this is structured so that it gives you the zone policies first, then the overlay policies after that, and then the general development policies last. It's the general that I'm heading to.
So just to give you an example, this is what you have to meet or the staff assess you against.
Indeed.
It's a very complex process. If you've never seen one before, how entertaining is this?
So our current development plan is structured within the corridor zone so that if something is 1 or 2 stories, so it's of a scale akin to a residential scale, it has a set of policies that apply to it. And if it's 3 or more stories and has a scale that is greater than anywhere else in the city, bar a couple of our activity centres, then it has additional policies that apply to it. A range of those, but the ones we added in our DPA a few years ago looked at occupants amenity and streetscape quality in terms of design improvement. Those design improvement policies were added to the zone and to the general modules. one of those general modules in our development plan is the one that applies to 3 or more storey dwellings. I highlight on the screen in front of you this module that has a number of, for example, the external appearance design criteria only applies to buildings that are 4 or more building levels. So the effect of what seems to be a relatively modest detail on the face of it is that there are a significant proportion of the applications we receive that would be assessed against a lesser design standard than the policy on the screen in front of us now. If I take a brief scroll, that's all. So there is here the equivalent external appearance module relating to buildings that are 3 levels or less. So this, for example, would allow a townhouse to tick 3 of the boxes of the following. So having a veranda, having a balcony, and having 2 materials on the front would achieve the design quality criteria around the front elevation, which is a great deal diminished from our current design quality standards in the policy, and is diminished below that of the policy that applies elsewhere in the zone to buildings that are 4 levels or more in height. And so certainly our submission is saying you've set the policy modules incorrectly, and that if you reset them so that they change as they do currently between 2 and 3 stories, that it will address this issue and maintain much of our current design quality standard.
So is that a simple change to the way the code is written at the moment?
In our mind, it is a simple change. As I've indicated before the meeting, we have met with staff at the AGD now, Plan SA, a couple of times about this issue. After our first meeting, they indicated that they weren't understanding where we were coming from. After the second meeting, they indicated that this feedback made sense and they were open to looking at that change and encouraged us to have it in our submission, hence it appears in that submission for you.
So in a sense, it's a dumbing down of what we already have. So our standard is sort of up here and theirs is down here somewhere.
In relation to a particular type of application,
Yes.
it makes up a high proportion of our applications.
The
Yes.
three level, is that the issue?
Indeed. The 3
Yes.
levels. So if we were to look at 4-storey buildings, the vast majority of that policy has come across. There are some nuanced differences, but by and large, we're quite satisfied that the department has learnt the lessons of our design review DPA.
Yeah.
One of the key ones was having Matt Davis, from an architectural perspective, demonstrate that previous policy framework not working for 3-storey townhouses. And our fear is that that lesson has been forgotten.
Absolutely. Okay, brilliant. Good. Questions about this aspect? Any other? Alison?
So just excellent demonstration, because I think the demonstration is really important, because sometimes it gets lost in reports as far as us communicating it to our community. One of the things I kind of like out of this is we do have this on video. Is this live on YouTube or this is, no, it would be great to get this.
It's not live at the moment.
Meetings like, they can't see the presentation? Okay.
No, our technology hasn't stretched that far.
Which is an absolute shame, because it would have been a really valuable thing for our community to have seen, and I could have tagged some things to show some people that, okay, that makes the next question redundant.
I could
Apologies.
take on notice perhaps the development of a short presentation of this from our
Yes.
perspective. There is a video on the state government's website, but it may be that it's helpful from a local context.
That may not highlight some of the concerns, and that's certainly something that we'd like to get out to our community before the end of submissions, which is the 18th, which is Friday.
Okay, it's a good idea. That'd be a great suggestion. CEO, if you can facilitate. Also, how it works would be good just to help people understand.
For sure.
You know, pick a typical property. Here's how you can work out what your neighbour can do or you can do. You finished, Scott?
I haven't done it.
Thank you. We'll ask some questions now about what the recommendations before you. Just before you go, though, Scott, some of those questions might ask you to dip into this or answer something somewhere. I might kick off while you're here, just ask you about trees and the strength of the requirements for trees to be planted on private land as part of a development approval.
Well, so in terms of the code, it would really rely on the imposition of conditions that assist in strengthening that, I think it's fair to say. We are assisted by the fact that in the vast majority of the city, it's a performance assessment for a new dwelling, allowing us to impose such a condition. We, Resilient East, and a number of other councils have, on a number of occasions, indicated to the Plan SA that a condition should be added to the suite of those that can be applied to deemed to satisfy applications. That wouldn't necessarily benefit us here in Prospect, given that it is a performance assessment pathway. If I look at our colleagues at Norwood, for example, where there are a number of areas where deemed to satisfy criteria exists and could be applied to a dwelling, if someone is assessing that a tree is to be placed on that property, a condition that it actually occur and that it be maintained thereafter, which is one of the challenges of I could plant it and then immediately remove it and pave it.
Yep.
We've made that submission, as has Resilient East and others.
Okay, so in terms of areas like north of Regency Road, is that no longer deemed to satisfy? Is that now established neighbourhood? So the
Established neighbourhood with character overlay, meaning that it's not deemed to satisfy.
so we've had an upgrade out of this
Significant upgrade in that respect.
Yeah, that's terrific. Well done to you, both of you. Any other questions, Christina?
Yes, I don't know if some of you had time to see the email that was sent through from Elizabeth, the president of the Prospect Residents Association. And it's about, I know Scott, you must probably be aware of it, but the translation about Collingwood shops, shopping centre, into a suburban activity centre in the Planning and Design Code. So this puts the one like Collingwood Shopping Centre in the same category as North Park, which is a district centre. And there's no, any rate, so, and she talks about the difficulty of navigating the code, and it's ballooned from 3,000 pages to 7,000 pages. Lizzie downloaded the policies attached to North Park and Collingwood shops, and so I'm just trying to cut through a whole lot of it. So in transition to code, the distinction between district and neighbourhood zones has been lost. And she says one immediate difference that can be noticed in the two suburban activity centre locations, that's North Park Shopping Centre and Collingwood, is the height limit. The height limit for the Collingwood shops is 3 stories. The height limit for North Park is 5 stories. And so there is concern about the impact on this, on the residential area in the vicinity of the Collingwood shops. Remember, we just had the other one that said, well, now, you know, you can go over a street, all right? So you might have one small street like Cassie Street, which we've all heard about problems with traffic and whatever. Yeah, so it's saying that, well, North Park, being a district centre, has a whole other dimension of catering for a much wider geographic area and all, you know, the things that go with that, compared with, say, the smaller Collingwood Shopping Centre was basically a neighbourhood shopping centre, really.
So what the nature of our question is the Collingwood shops at risk of turning into a North Park?
Yes, it could quite easily do it, have higher...
Well, let's ask the question, because there's lots of other things in the code about that. So
just finishing off, so the immediate most difference between the district centre and neighbourhood centre, there needs to be more suitable zoning for Collingwood shops that would be a local activity centre, and so that she's suggesting that us as a council should, in our submission, put in to this, and I think she refers to a zone that the Norwood, Norwood Council have that would be more suitable. I can't find it quickly in here.
So can we get that addressed? Is that the case? Will Collingwood turn into North Park? Who can answer that?
Sure. I might take it in a couple of parts. First, in terms of building height, and then in terms of the broader question. So the current maximum building height for the Collinswood shops is 3 stories. That is reflected into the code. Both in the development plan and the code, it calls for 3-storey if it occurs to happen at the front of those properties adjacent North East Road, scaling down to 2-storey at the back. That is also reflected between the development plan and the code. So in terms of the scale of the building, that wouldn't change. The extent of the zone itself doesn't change, except for that question of zone creep we raised earlier, of course. But in terms of the zone, it doesn't change.
So it can't physically be bigger than the current zone, and it can't be
Indeed.
taller than the current height limit.
Indeed. So then this, in terms of the code, has interface height provisions in terms of building envelopes and a range of other criteria that restrict the scale of buildings in addition to the question of building height. And by virtue of the size of parcels involved in the Collinswood shops, there's really not a great deal of expansion that could occur there, and certainly no additional amount of expansion that could occur beyond the current development plan.
Unless
Yeah.
we or someone got the zone boundary shifted.
Indeed.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
So the real thing in terms of North Park Shopping Centre is its increased depth. As the size of the property is significantly larger, which allows for a significantly greater scale building on it than the Collinswood shops do.
The
boundary.
footprint at Collinswood wouldn't allow it, would it, even though.
You give them developers a chance and they'll come up with something, I'm sure. The paragraph here that Liz Crisp understands that from the Norwood Council that the revised draft code now includes a local activity centre zone, which is designed to apply to small local centres, which provide daily services and support walkable neighbourhoods with a more limited range of land uses, less intense residential development, when compared with the suburban activity centre zone, which is what Collinswood's been put into. So are we able to see how it compares what Norwood's got with the local activity centre zone?
What Norwood's got currently, or what they're proposed to have?
From their revised draft code now includes a local activity.
Proposed to have.
Yes.
So it's not just Norwood, it is a range of cities and towns across Adelaide that would have the local activity centre now applied to them. So prior to this version of the code, there are currently in the development plan 4 tiers of centre zoning: local, neighbourhood, district and regional. There are some places where regional is called urban core, but there are 4 layers. That was going to transition into 2. So the largest centres within the state, Marion Shopping Centre, Elizabeth, would be captured in one way and every other type of centre would be captured in another. What's proposed now is to have 3. So things that are local centres in current development plans would transition across to local activity centres. They are things like on Hampstead Road in Port Enfield, there is a small veterinarian clinic and an adjacent, I think, a collectible items store. So there's 2 shops next to each other. Those 2 properties are within a local centre zone and they would translate across to a local activity centre zone. So they're typically sort of 2 to 4, 2 to 5 tenancies, very small, and they do exist in side streets. So we've got, for example, on Braun Road, some of those original shops. In other council areas, they are local centres in some cases. And that's what that local activity centre is now intended to apply to in the code.
But you're saying that therefore it wouldn't apply to something like Collinswood, is that your view?
It's significantly smaller than the Collinswood shops area of zone in terms of its size. So I don't think it's like for like in that sense. We're talking about those 2 properties on Hampstead Road, as an example. That's maybe 800 to 1,000 square metres of total area within the zone, whereas this is many thousands of square metres within the Collinswood shops zone.
But we've found out that they can, if it continues under what's proposed, that they can actually creep another half a street
They can.
all around.
Another provision, not
Separate
that
zone.
particular provision, another one.
So one doesn't sort of necessarily match up with the other.
I think they're 2 separate issues. The zone one, sorry, the description of the zone sounds like that's going to be hard for us to win, but the one about the adjacent street turning into shops sounds like one we should stand our digs on, because that would just fragment the street. I mean, it wouldn't be all the houses get knocked over. It'd be that one and that one and that one, and it'd be a mess.
Yeah. And apropos the particular one in Balfour Street, or if you think of where other school zones are, for example. So would our, under the proposed planning, our staff, I'm just trying to think, like if you've got an established school and then somebody, wants to put some shop or home on, like we were just discussing, increases the traffic and, perhaps a lot of some other negative type things happening. So we wouldn't be able to stop it under the current proposed plan.
In the context that the code would allow for each property on Balfour Street, not one singular, but all of them, to be potentially demolished and replaced with a shop, I think it would be extremely hard for our staff to complete a performance assessment if it met those criteria to be able to refuse an application. If it would achieve those criteria, we would need to approve it or need to have our refusal overturned by the court, at which point it would be approved.
Yes. And
Coming up to time, by the way.
yes, all right, sorry, okay.
Okay, if I pull us back in formal session, that's not to exclude questions. You may have questions during debate. Thank you very much, Mr. McCluskey, for your presentation. Very enlightening. Item 10.5 then is for us, the second consultation period, the draft planning and design code recommendations on page 276 to 277 with that detailed attachments 1 to 11 with the text proposed for us to respond to. Somebody happy to move it in its current form? Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I'll second it.
You go.
Councillor Backer, do you wish to speak to it?
Look, I will speak to it. Look, I'm really impressed the level of understanding that our staff have, and it's not just this last iteration, as the iterations before. In many ways, I think we've been informing some of the policy, but unfortunately, like I said, things get overlooked. And I just would highlight there was a mention there of, using button 1, then button 2, not recommending button 3, because there's no guarantee that doesn't seem to be a confidence that everything necessarily follows through. So this is just what we've identified. There may be another 10 anomalies that get thrown up. So, look, I thank the staff for going through it. One of the concerns I have is this is phase 3 and the preparedness of the state to listen, which was why I'm really encouraged, I would encourage people to talk to their community and certainly make local members aware that there are anomalies that are going to be very, very unpopular should they get through. So I appreciate the staff's efforts and I hope that the notes are listened to. So I'd encourage you to support them in motion.
Thank you. Seconder? Deputy Mayor, do you wish to speak to it?
Briefly, I guess it does. It helps sort of send home the message of how complex this is to deal with. Probably millions of dollars has been spent on software solution to try to help people wade their way through, and we can fairly easily, those in the know can find a range of issues with it. But it is, as Councillor Backer pointed out, comforting to know that the team internally here are right across this and are doing everything they can to support the wishes of the community through this process.
Thank you. Any further debate? Just from the chair, probably said it before, but I remind you that I have the joy of being the local government representative on the Minister's Reform Advisory Group on behalf of the whole sector. So I've been on this journey now for 5 years, and it is getting very close to a conclusion, which I think is an acceptable conclusion given the original parameters. But it falls short in a number of ways, and that is that it's supposed to be a simpler and easier to understand system. I'm not yet convinced, although the current one is pretty convoluted. It does look a little easier to navigate than the current one. The other premise we had was that we get better design outcomes out of this new code, and I think the proof will be in the pudding, but I'm far from convinced that the new code structure provides for better design outcomes. And you'll see a note in there that whilst design guidelines are referred to, it's a very nice booklet, they're not mandated. So good people will look at it, bad people won't worry about it because they'll see that it has no effect in law. So many of us are concerned about that aspect. There are some other aspects which have been raised tonight, which I think I have a mind to take further, and I may talk to the CEO about how we lobby local members about that, how we inform members of the community, but also whether I write to the Minister on behalf of this council about some of those matters, particularly the watering down of our corridor zone achievements for that 3-level category. The issue about zone creep around commercial zones, I think, is probably the other one. And I guess the issue about design more generally, I think we should raise as well. So unless someone argues vociferously against it, I think I'll take that liberty and write and reinforce what's in this recommendation should it get up around those particular things. There is a dilemma here, and that is that the current system, I think, is a bit, as I say, clunky. It's riddled with different outcomes through case law, which has made it, in my view, heavily compromised. The new code seeks to capture most of that and try and quantify it in a way which is more justifiable. We won't know probably for 5 years how successful this iteration's been, but it's time, in my view, to move on from the old one. I'm still worried about a number of aspects, though. I can never see how, on merit, you can deal with the plot ratio variation, and if it gets beyond 5%, beyond what it should be, people get nervous. But it's quite acceptable to have a 33% variation on height, and people think that's okay because it's just one additional story. That sort of variance just drives me bananas. So I don't see any stiffening in this code about those sort of height creep issues, which I find pretty distressing. There's also some car park watering down in here, which I think just creates merry hell for people like us trying to defend, density's good, but can you also look after the higher density of cars as well? Magically, they just don't disappear. So a few things like that I think are still a problem. But overall, I'm a supporter of reforms in principle, and I look forward to the education process and the immense savings which are meant to flow through us through simpler assessment processes. I'm yet to be convinced about that. So we'll, as I say, we'll see, but it could take quite some time for us to actually know how the system works and how well it works. Congratulations to staff, not just for keeping on top of it, but for effectively strengthening the character in our city, for extending the zones, I guess, from deemed to satisfy or risk of deemed to satisfy, indeed some were under that, to be zones of neighbourhood interest or whatever, neighbourhood character, or what's it called? Established neighbourhood, which means we can talk about what's around them. Also, the battle for contributory items has been won, and I think sensibly called representative buildings. I think that's a good change of description as well. So there are quite a few things to like in it. So I commend the motion, and as I've discussed, I'll probably write and reinforce some particular things. And as I say, I've encouraged the CEO to set up meetings with our local police to make sure they're across it, because this is quite a complex area and hard to get your head around until you see someone's house that's finished, which is all too late. Thank you. Any further debate? Councillor De Backer, do you wish to sum up?
Just briefly, though you're not supposed to bring anything new into it. On page 281, it talks about the Planning and Development Fund, concerning outcome of $25.5 million from the fund towards planning reform that should have been used towards local open space, and this could have contributed to our open space in the City of Prospect. So it's that's a real concern as well, and I'm sure you've made that point.
Absolutely.
So I encourage you to support the motion, and if we can just keep the, not pressure on, but just keep the conversations going.
Thank you. That concludes debate. All those in favour? Against? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. And thank you, staff, for helping us through it. 10.6, Verge Development Policy Recommendations on page 297. Is somebody happy to move it in its current form? Councillor Barnett.
Yes, thank you. I'm pleased that we have got to this stage. As I walk around the area, I've been jotting down and noticed a few more of verges, including one half of one of our smaller streets on one side, which has got artificial turf all the way down, and not one tree in that little street either. Any rate, that's for following up. So I think if you've got the summary and have read it through, I think that we're looking to recognise that our landscape verges are another additional aspect to our character, amenity, biodiversity and our greening. This will go one small way. I still think in other information that I've sent around to council members and staff that we could, this just really deals with the one bit about the trying to reduce the amount of artificial turf and the reducing our heat map through the artificial grass. Hopefully somehow we can get the message through to people. I still, and I'm sure other elected members do, that people just seem to think they can just go ahead and plant anything they like, basically. Some do the right thing and contact our council staff. Some I know have been a bit narky because they can't plant some huge gum tree that they've already bought and put into our verge. I think again, so hopefully this will get passed. It's got a few provisos in it. They're about, like, for example, you know, if our bowling club or some other areas like that. So we can't, in my words, unfortunately, get rid of it completely, but this is a step towards starting to reduce the artificial turf installation, particularly in our verges. So I commend it to you.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Deputy Mayor, do you wish to speak to it?
Well, thank you to Councillor Barnett for bringing this to the table. And I guess it's a dual purpose. Policy one is to reduce the future likelihood of people putting down strips of carpet on their front lawn, so on their nature strip. That wouldn't be a not nature strip then, wouldn't it? But the other thing is also to make it a little bit clearer. In here, I wonder whether I could put forward a question briefly. If we're looking to encourage, well, maybe it's a suggestion, if we're looking to encourage people to get on board with this concept, could we provide examples to people who are searching for what can be done and what can't be done? Because often that's a barrier. People have good intentions, but they don't really know what to do and they don't know what some good examples are. So if I can encourage that to be part of whatever package is available to people who inquire, then that could help guide them in the right direction. Yeah, this is it's a really good idea, and hopefully we do see people coming up with some creative ways to use that strip in the front of their properties.
Thank you. Further debate, Councillor Becker.
Again, thank you, Councillor Barnett, for championing this. One of my concerns, though, is we've just gone and used synthetic grass at the new dog park. So one of the issues is being seen as quite hypocritical. I think where we can't use grass, we use mulch. And I think, people go, well, why can't I? Because you just... So I would be really concerned if there's going to be more artificial grass in any other upcoming projects like Charles Kane Reserve or anything. Is that a question maybe through the chair to the director, if there's any more?
Yes. CEO, are you going to install artificial grass anywhere else in the city?
I think I'd have to refer that through you, Chair, to the director.
Very wise.
Yeah.
Director.
Through the chair, we only have one dog park, and that's the only place where we inside that open leaf artificial grass. So it's at the dog park, it's a combination of natural lawn, so we put lawn down, and we put this open leaf astroturf at the top, and the grass grows through it. So it's very hard wearing. That's the only application we envisage installing this grass.
Thank you. Councillor.
Thank you. So yes, I think it's sort of something that obviously will be watched as well in regards to that. And in speaking to Deputy Mayor's pointed out examples. I think there's really good opportunity. It has been done before in our magazine articles, some community prizes for people who have great verges, and some input of some hardy plants that we use in our own infrastructure projects. Be great.
Thank you. Further speakers? Councillor Nguyen.
The report indicates that council maintains a view of the verges across the city. Can you tell me how many verges we actually look after, and why are we looking after some of these verges?
CEO?
Through you, Chair, to the Director.
Chair, we don't maintain any verges. We maintain road contributions. Is that what you're referring to?
It says in the report verges somewhere.
So, for example, the verge at kind of on Prospect Road, we maintain that verge. Churchill Road, we maintain that. But otherwise, in terms of traditional residential streets, we don't maintain. We will come and, if it's very high growth, we'll come and slash it once a year. I suppose that's a form of maintenance. We don't, for example, the city of Burnside spends around $600,000 a year mowing verges throughout the city. We don't provide that service at all.
I think 5.17 mentions what they're doing. They're maintaining verges or roundabouts which council has planted with grass or ground cover plants.
Yeah, thank you for that. And point of order upheld. Stop speaking, Councillor Pearce. On your turn. It might be soon though. Councillor Nguyen, hopefully you heard that interruption as explanation from Councillor Pearce and from the Director.
Apologies.
Except we do maintain a lot of verges on main roads, very, very few in side streets, although I can think of a few places where we've allowed full paving outside churches and the like, where I presume if there was a paver that was sticking up, we'd go and fix it. But that's not mowing grass, for instance. Any further debate? Councillor Ritter.
Just where it says, obviously, in the exec summary on page 298, it says, paragraph 3, any application for the installation of artificial grass needs to demonstrate why it's been selected over other council preferred options such as lawn and garden beds. Our policy is to ban this. Why are we putting this line in there? And can I just seek some clarification as to why that's there, and what sort of example or could you give me an example where it would seem to be acceptable over other forms?
Yeah,
Through you, Chair.
Through you, Chair. For examples provided before, we're actually providing artificial grass at a dog park. We're recommending as part of the draft master plan to allow AstroTurf for artificial grass on a bowling green. We thought it'd be quite hypocritical if we didn't allow certain circumstances. In page 302, council will only permit an application for installation of artificial grass where the following criteria can be met: achieving a warming outcome of 3 degrees or less, and refer to the table as part of the policy. Allows localised water soakage, not affect or have impact on street trees, have positive effect on sediment or water runoff, preferably have recycled content, and demonstrate the use of materials that will minimise future microplastic issues.
Okay. Look, I can understand. Like, if you, no, thank you for that. I do appreciate the explanation. Look, I can understand. So, for a bowling green, if you've got for a bowling club, but if we're looking at a policy for residential, I would actually like, if possible, look, I'll test it if it works. I would actually like to move an amendment that applications for, see if I can get the wording right. Whether you can move it from the exec summary because it's got to flow down the policy, but I'd like to move an amendment that no applications are considered for artificial on Verge. If we're going to be doing a policy, I just think it's got to be consistent.
Be amending part 3.
Well, it's also part of the exec summary. There's a whole, I'm assuming there'll be quite a bit that has to be adapted. So I would like.
What's on the floor, Councillor, sorry to get in there, is only parts 1, 2 and 3.
Beg your pardon, part 3.
Part 3 would be endorse the draft Verge development policy as presented attachments 1 to 7 as amended to prohibit the installation of artificial grass on verges.
Correct. Residential verges, yep. I'm assuming that's where it's.
Well, you just say on verges.
Verges, yep.
And I think just to test while we just get the system back up, CEO, Director, I presume if we said on verges, that would still permit us to put it in dog parks or bowling greens or hockey pitches or wherever else there was a specialist technical need to put it in. Would that be correct?
Yes.
So there'd be a disparity, but this is a verges policy, not a parks policy or a sporting facility policy.
Bowling green, I get that.
Footy clubs might want them in a run-out area or...
Yeah, no, that's different than a...
Yeah. Cricket pitches, which have concrete under them, dangerous.
Yeah. I'm playing on Prospect Oval.
Sorry, CEO, we...
Sorry, Chair, we're just trying to, I think.
Those who are watching, we have technical difficulties. Be a test pattern would appear if you're the ABC television. But you have to stay very late to see those nowadays. I think they've gone, haven't they?
I don't suppose I can have a.
No, sorry.
Wait.
I'd rather not. I'd rather get the amendment up. I think the amendment's fairly straightforward, CEO. If you could make a written record of it.
Sure.
Just to part 3, as presented in attachments 1 to 7, amended to prohibit approval for artificial turf on verges.
Is we able to ask another question?
I prefer just to get the amendment up and then I can move through that. So I'm just recording it as I stated it before, Councillor, that your amendment is to part 3 and add the words in the end, as amended to prohibit the approval of artificial grass on verges. Okay. Do you wish to speak any further to that? Sorry? Verges.
As amended to prohibit the approval of artificial turf on verges. So we've captured that, Chair.
Very good.
Yeah, if that, and on the end, if we could just add with existing ones to be kept in good repair, whether we can add
With artificial.
because obviously we can't. The policy is not retrospective, and I totally understand why it's not. But with encouraging.
It's your amendment.
With encouraging residents with existing artificial. What's the word? Artificial grass to be well maintained. We'll just leave it. Just leave it. Actually, just leave that off. Just leave it as you had it.
Room for a second amendment if someone wishes to do that.
Just keep it as a amended to prohibit artificial grass on verges, and we'll just leave it at that.
Okay, so full stop after the word verges.
Yeah, just leave it at that for now.
Yep, as is customary. I'll just get that cleaned up. I'll just seek interest from the mover and seconder as to whether they're happy to incorporate. Councillor Barnett.
Yes, definitely.
Deputy Mayor, happy to incorporate.
Yes.
Both are. I'll now seek leave of the meeting. Seek leave to incorporate that change. All those in favour? And Gibbs, that is incorporated successfully. And now becomes part of the motion, of course. The questions that we had, though, Councillor, did you finish speaking, Councillor Ripp?
Is Councillor Nguyen able to ask an additional question, or would it be best if I asked the
We
question?
can after Councillor Barnett asks her question.
My question most probably goes through the chair to the director about do we have anything there that would assist us or your staff that if there is artificial grass existing and it's not kept in good repair, can we do something to improve that situation? Or
question. CEO,
Again,
Director.
through you, the Chair.
Through the chair, it's a very subjective call about what is good repair. Current policy. The policy does say that council, sorry, I'll just pull the words out. Council reserves the right to remove any landscaping that comes unsightly or unkept or restricts sight lines for traffic. We could amend that to council reserves the right to remove any landscaping and or artificial grass that becomes unsightly or unkept.
Yes. Well, unsightly would imply.
It's a word of poor.
Anyway, I guess that's the answer to your question.
Yes. All right, and thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nguyen.
I'm just referring back to the director with that question that I asked earlier. I found the script to that, so I'm just on page 300.
Thank you.
The last paragraph, it says that the current council practice is to encourage residents to maintain the verges directly adjacent to the resident's property. There are, however, a certain number of verges across the city that are maintained in some capacity by the council and not the resident. So hence my question.
That's poorly worded.
I was just wanting to get clarification on that.
Through the chair, also referring to ones that were unkept that we come and slash occasionally.
That needs tidying up.
Just in answer to the question, it's interesting when talk about maintained. If there's a lot of history with this stuff. If it is unkept, council will slash and poison, and ultimately replace with gravel, which is easy to poison and suppress its growth. You could say that that's council maintaining the verge, but we actually shut it down. Other councils, and this came up as recently as today, mow the verges, and it's a matter of frequency, service standard, how many times a year do they mow it, and hope that people mow it in between. So just north of us, I think their regime is to mow it 4 times a year, I think, from something like that. This council, for decades, has encouraged owners to maintain the verges out the front of them, which is not their land, it's our land. And that has become customary. And we have a very, very high level of take-up. And most of that take-up is very well organised and people take pride in it. Other councils are envious of how we've managed that. It's become cultural here, but it's certainly not widespread. But as the director said, when they don't look after it, there are stages that it goes through to get it to the point of it being gravelled out. And there might be a new resident comes, who just expects council to do it. They get a letter, hello, it's you, and it might be slashed in that process of resolving the matter. The only other ones we maintain in good order are the main road frontages. So like my house on Prospect Road is paved from the fence to the street. That's maintained by council. There's nothing to maintain, but that's down here. All the new gardens on Prospect Road, all maintained by council, even though they're technically the verge of the house that abuts the main street. Yeah, I hope that explains that. Yeah. Okay, any further debate on this item? That being the case, Councillor Barnett, do you wish to sum up?
I thank people for their comments, and I just hope that we can really get this passed and get this going, and that we, I assume as we do with a new policy, get out there and make sure that it's fairly well known, and hopefully people that do have artificial grass currently may be encouraged to change their minds. All right, thank you.
Okay, that concludes debate. All those in favour? Against? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, general business of an urgent nature. Is there anything you'd wish us to consider as urgent? No. Reports for information. Sorry, Deputy Mayor. Did you have something?
Well, yes.
Then let's hear it.
I think I'd consider it urgent because we might not have a chance before Christmas to thank the events team for the great work they did to bring together the Festive Streets program, which happened around the city on Sunday night. We all were discussing how successful they were. and something which council's been trying to get happening for years. So it's great to see it happening. And the team did a great job in organising and planning, and then dealing with the changes that might have happened, but also on the night coming around and making sure everything was in place and in order. And I think that really exemplifies how that team goes over and above to deliver good results. So I just wanted to note that sentiment from me, maybe other people.
Can I take that as a elected member briefing, not in the right place, but as a briefing rather than an urgent item that needs a motion? Because
Oh, yeah, okay.
to get up, I need to seek leave for it to be an urgent matter.
Yep, no, I'm happy with that.
Happy with that?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I certainly endorse your sentiments there. Absolutely. No doubt about that. Any other items you'd wish to consider as urgent business? No? Okay, we'll move on to reports for information. Does anybody wish to withdraw item 12.1, the mayoral monthly activity report? No. Does anybody wish to withdraw 12.2, the council member allowances 2020-2021? No. The 12.3, the Eastern Waste Management Authority board meeting minutes? No. And anybody wish to withdraw item 12.4, the Audit Committee meeting minutes? Councillor Rip, I saw first. Someone happy to move on block items 12, 1, 2 and 3? Deputy Mayor, no speaking to the formal motions on block, seconded by Councillor Rip. All those in favour? They are carried unanimously. Thank you. Councillor Rip, item 12.4, page 330.
Thank you. Just let me pull this up. Sorry, iPad's playing up a bit. Beautiful. Look, I will move with the recommendation, but the reason I pulled this out, I just wanted to make council aware, in case you weren't aware, that we do have a special audit committee meeting coming up on this coming Monday when it comes around. So I do encourage you to come if you are able to attend. It will be really only one item of business, and we'll be looking at. Sorry, that light's terrible. I'll just step aside for a sec. We'll be looking into focusing on the audit committees and particularly the independent members, and looking at how much they believe that we can borrow as a council will be a hot topic in the lead up with federal and state grants coming up. So the audit committee are looking at that. Staff of the reason it's going to a special meeting, staff are spending extra time really looking at the long-term financial plan, and then and I know that the Director Jenny Mooney's meeting with Corinne and really trying to map out modelling and giving council, particularly in January, the best quality information possible for us to make an informed decision. At the last audit committee meeting, we did spend an extensive amount of time talking about it, but we thought it's better to put it to a special meeting to give it extra further consideration. So it was quite a interesting topic. So if you are interested, please do come along and sit in the gallery, because the last meeting I found really fascinating. There were a lot of other important items at the last meeting, but I just thought I'd bring this one to your attention because I know it's going to be prevalent when we're applying for grants, coming the end of January next year. It's also going to be, it also could affect what you do for your budget bids as well, some of that discussion, because if we've got lock borrowings into certain grants, it could limit how much spare money we have to do some of the other things we want to do. So really, I think please come along if you can. On that note, while I am moving this, I just wanted to ask a question to the staff. I haven't, unless I've missed it on an email, I haven't seen anything come around yet about budget bid submissions and due dates and different things. When are we expecting that to be? If I can just get some clarification, because again, this will all frame part of my process of what I put in from this discussion at the audit committee. So I just wanted to ask.
The question is relevant to those discussions. CEO, the director.
Through the chair, it is on its way. Staff, finance manager is formulating an email and preparing all the documentations. Hopefully, it will get to you either next week or the first week of January, the latest.
Thank you.
So is a further question possible? Will we be expecting to have till the end of January for budget?
Yeah, through the chair, possibly end of January.
Excellent. All right, so look, I'll leave it there, but I do encourage you to come along because it's going to be one of our probably most important conversations in quite a while at the committee.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor De Backer, do you wish to speak to it?
Yes, I would. Yeah, I actually attended the last audit committee meeting because, again, I think I needed to, make myself aware just of some of the limitations and opportunities and I guess the process of how the audit committee works. I was really reassured with some of the comments that they talked about our draft community plan, and certainly I think we've heard from the community as well, but it's also reassuring to hear from people that are looking at the numbers and the figures to sort of say, okay, well, this is an aspirational document, but one of the comments they did say is that there are the checks and balances and maybe looking at across all the strategic documents, and that is to be highlighted as part of putting it out there. We're certainly looking at things like procurement policies to increase the amount of recycled content. I think that's really good, and some of that draft one's coming back, I think, to the next Audit Committee meeting. But I guess some of the levers over the next 10 years are going to be really interesting. So we've got a asset management plan coming back to us, and that's going to be really interesting to see the numbers. We heard about, footpaths and service levels, and I guess and things like yellow line markings, what that's actually going to cost us if that's the direction we need to go down. So obviously there might not be an appetite for significant rate rises over the next 5 years, given everything that's happening in the world, and I think we're going to have to really look carefully at our strategic projects. So yeah, I'd encourage you, if you can, get along, or at least sort of dive into the minutes and have a look. So I'd recommend the motion, and looking forward to hearing more from the Audit Committee.
Thank you. It's great to see you there. Any further debate on this item? There being none, Councillor Ripp, just to sum up.
Just to thank Councillor De Backer for coming along to it, because, yeah, I know it sparked a lot of conversation, so I do appreciate the interest in that last meeting.
Thank you. Well, concludes debate. All those in favour? Against? It's carried unanimously. Okay, council member reports and briefings. We have heard from the Deputy Mayor about the Festive Street explosion. Thank you for that. Any other member reports and briefings? Councillor Barnett.
Yes, last Friday evening I attended, and the Mayor was present, our Community Service Awards. I was there for part of the time, because then I had to go next door for the next event in the Newmarch Gallery exhibition, which was quite an unusual one, in the fact that it's not very often you see the whole range of and in Newmarch's work, and that was quite a common comment of people, and so they were very pleased to be able to have that. And if you go around past, come in off our Vine Street Plaza entrance, and you turn left down the Irish Heart Room, if you look up on the walls there, you'll see an extension of the Newmarch Gallery exhibition, with some portraits of former Mayor Matthew Mitchell and a resident Jenny Smith, another resident Julia Lester, and myself as former Mayor. And that came about of a particular previous portraits exhibition done by Annie Newmarch. She called us her cultural workers in the community. So it was quite pleasing. Former Mayor Matthew Mitchell quite proudly has his hanging in his study, and similarly with mine. So it was very pleasing to be able to have that on loan. So, yeah. So, yes, thank you.
Yeah, any further member briefings or reports? Councillor Pearce.
Yep. Just want to let everyone know that Councillor Wynne and I decided to jointly send a letter out to the North Ward residents. It was a twofold reason. One was just to touch base, I guess, to inform them on projects that were happening, and secondly, to ask them for any suggestions that they could come forward with regard to budget bids. And it's quite interesting, actually. We've got really quite a few responses, and 99% very positive. And there's some common issues, and we're going to get together and collate the bids that have been suggested. I mean, most of them are realistic, some aren't. But getting back to the Audit Committee situation, it'll just depend on where we go with that. But Yeah, the good thing I thought of coming of this was touching base with people, the number of people that came back and sort of appreciated that the letter coming out for no apparent reason. So it was just an idea we came up with, and it's worked very well, I think.
That's very good. Very good. And the joint nature of it is quite good in my observation. Yeah, very good. Thank you. Just from my point of view, just wanted to back up what Deputy Mayor has said. The festive street explosion was fantastic, overwhelmingly positive feedback, joyful experience for people who were participating. So many kids on the street. It was great to see people taking ownership of their public space and using it very creatively. Congratulations to the staff under Director for Community and Planning in leading that initiative. I'm not sure what's happened. I haven't quite got to the bottom of it, but we've had a program to have more street parties for years. We've had a fund to have it. We've had the process in place, but we haven't really had them happen. Something's changed this year, and we had, a dozen of them, and they were fabulous. And Alice and I managed to get to 8, which took a fair bit of effort because we wanted to say hi to as many people as we could, and I wanted to hear what people thought, and they were delighted in the main, absolutely delighted. So they all want to do it again. So that's great feedback too. So we'll obviously be faced with a budget bid in order to do what we've just done, given that this one was funded by parts of the events fund that we reworked in light of COVID. Also on Saturday night, there was a film showing at Broadview Oval that I understand about 400 people turned up to. I wasn't able to make that one, but that looked like that was well appreciated. Friday night, as Councillor Barnett has said, Community Service Awards and the New March Survey opened, both with restricted numbers because the restrictions didn't ease until Sunday night. So it was a very big weekend for the event staff, and I think it's a testimony to their dogged determination to follow through on what we asked them to do, which was to get people together as soon as it was reasonably practical to, as often as they could reasonably do, and as much as we could afford, and to think completely differently about the events that we ran. And I think it's beholden on us to say, congratulate you, CEO, on your leadership and that of the Director and the team, and pass our thanks on to the team for just a fabulous job that they've done in coping with so many changes throughout the year. Not everything's been able to happen. But when it has, it's been exceptional, it really has. And it's typical of the year that innovation has led us to think differently. And I'm sure when it comes to our planning for event season 2021, we've now got a whole raft of different ideas to pick and pack from. And I guess an enthusiasm to think creatively outside of those boxes as well. So I think that's been really terrific. So I just wanted to make sure that was said, and could you please pass on the thanks of everybody I spoke to for that initiative and how well it was run. Okay, any further council member reports or briefings?
Just wanted to add to that to say I attended both the Mawson and Asquith parties, and they were excellent, and the feedback I had was really exciting, and people want to see this go ahead. So really, I know this year's been a challenging year, but I want to thank all the staff right across the City of Prospect team for in their areas, whether it be events, infrastructure, communications. It's been definitely a challenging year, but thank you for all the work that you have done to try and do the best you can to deliver for us. It's not always easy with competing projects, but I have appreciated the staff's efforts, particularly this year. But a couple of silver linings for me, COVID is not all doom and gloom. A couple of silver linings for me, we've learnt this year how to communicate and do business differently. We've learnt how to do events differently. Admittedly, COVID's forced us to do that, but there are some serious positive silver linings that do come out of a dark year, and I look forward to seeing these type of events in different sort of innovative events moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Further reports or briefings? If not, we'll move on to item 14.1, the motion notice we've done. Item 15, questions with notice there are nil, which takes us to the confidential item. And the item at 16.1, the first item is that we go into confidence. Somebody happy to move that way regarding the Australia Day Citizen of the Year Awards? Deputy Mayor, do you wish to speak to it? The seconder, Councillor Ripp, do you wish to speak to it? Any further debate? All those in favour? Against? It is carried unanimously. And therefore, we are now in confidence. CEO,